Hello, hello.
Hello.
And we are looking at our second section from Job. And we're.
Oh, I was misreading this.
You thought it was Job?
No, I saw the one,
Oh, you thought it
and
was
I
chapter
thought it
one?
was chapter one, and I was like, how
Didn't
is
we
this
already
the
do chapter
second
one?
section? We already.
We did chapter one, yeah.
Yeah, we did.
Which we debated last time about that, whether that was a prayer or not. And with this one, too, we're kind of.
Well, we know
We,
there's a prayer, or
we know there. Yeah.
there's a section that's definitely addressed to God, but the question is, where does that begin?
And how much is
And
to God.
how much of it is actually to God, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part with some of these things. This is an entire chapter section. Not all of it is prayer,
Yeah.
but there are certainly spots in there that seems like, well, maybe here is it. So let's just jump into it.
Yeah,
It's
let's
Job
jump
chapter
in.
7. This is Job, of course, is the one speaking here. He's speaking this entire time, so this is not any kind of narrative or anything. It's just him talking. Um, Earlier in chapter 1, there was a narration of all the events that were happening to him, and then he, just begins speaking. But this is all him from the very first word. Has not man a hard service on earth, and are not his days like the days of a hired hand? I guess he could be asking his friend. Remember, his friends are here. He's got these 3 friends
Yep.
that are sitting there with him. He could just be talking with them about life, maybe.
And I think that's something important for us to think about as we're going through this is, unless something sounds challenging enough to the point of that it's challenging God, that it's directed to God, he has 3 friends here listening to him.
Yeah, and they're listening to all of it. They're listening even to the parts that
Yeah.
are directed to God, but they're hearing it all. Of course, God's hearing it all as well,
Right.
obviously. But it is difficult on some of these to where's the line? So here, I mean, could he be saying this to God? Possibly. Possibly he's just talking to his friends. Hey, it's just tough being a man, hard work. It's like his days are like a hired hand. Then he goes on, verse 2, like a slave who longs for the shadow, the shade, really, right? Yeah, when you're working hard out in the sun, you step into the shade, it's 10 degrees
very
cooler, or
nice.
it's nice to step in that shade, especially if there's a little bit of a breeze, then it's really nice. And like a hired hand who looks for his wages, he understands, you want to get paid, you want some.
You want rest, you want reward.
Yeah, you want
That's it.
You want to get a reward for your labor. I mean,
Yeah.
and that he's feeling like it's hard, and I'm not. And now his frustration obviously is he's not getting the reward. Verse 3.
And I love I'm noticing this in verse 3. So I am allotted months of emptiness, and nights of misery are apportioned to me. He has a very Hebrew poetic theme there.
Oh yeah.
Where he starts with the slave wanting the shadow, the hired hand wanting the wages, and then he flips it. For the wages, he has months of emptiness, nothingness. Mm-hmm. And then night, keeping that shadow theme of misery. So instead of comfort during the shade, comfort during the shadows, he has misery and torture. And that's what he's getting for his reward. And so you can see a very thematic kind of dance going on in his wordplay, and that's very cool. And then it continues through. He says, "When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? But the night is long, and I am full of tossing till the dawn." I think that's a very clear picture. We've all had those nights where it's just restless, you're uncomfortable, you can't sleep, and you're just like, when do I get up? When is the sun going to get up? So that I can just stop being here. My flesh is clothed with worms and dirt. My skin hardens, then breaks out afresh. In Job, there's a lot of picturesque language for him describing his misery. And
lots of analogies, lots of simile and metaphor, and yeah, very graphic descriptions of things.
and we're starting it right there.
Yeah.
Thinking about your skin like drying out, cracking off, and then
Breaking.
breaking through, and then it all starting over again. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's miserable. I mean, he's lost his wealth, all his all his cattle and everything, his kids, everything. And now at this point, also he's
physically miserable,
ill and suffering from boils and things. When he talks about his skin breaking out and all this, and his skin hardening stuff, he's not being figurative there. No. He's literally having these boils and scabs, and he's miserable in so many ways.
He's sitting with a broken piece of pottery, scraping his skin open over and over.
Yeah, because it hurts and itches, and if you ever had some sort of a rash, you know how that can be. You know how bad that can be. But here we have then. I mean, so he's got his gripes, he's got his complaints, and now. Verse 7 is, I think, the first time he really I think he starts to turn his attention toward talking to God specifically. We're not always in agreement about how this is.
Right. And this is interesting in the translation that we have, because at the start of verse 7, it stops the quotation and it starts a new quotation.
Yeah, it's like it's a new
Job.
Paragraph almost.
Yeah, so it is almost like they decided, he's addressing someone different here. But maybe that's just me just kind of speculating, but it seems odd to me that they would start that right at the part where you're like, this is him addressing God.
Well, and part of it is, he does start a new sentence, and instead of, before he's just describing things, in verse 4 he's saying, he's like talking to himself, I'm saying to myself, when shall I rise?
Yeah.
And then he just goes back to talking to those friends again, the night's long and so forth, and I'm having all these problems. And then in verse 7 he actually, and that is almost, it's just like he's just griping to anybody who will listen, but now he specifically in verse 7, that first word, remember, and it's the understood you in English. Right. You remember. So he's directly speaking to someone now. It's not just whining and griping to everybody and anybody they'll hear. He's now addressing someone. Now the question, of course, is
friends or God.
Is it friends? Is it God? That's the question. I tend to think, because of what he says here in a couple verses, that he actually is turning toward God because of what he says here. But, well, let's go through it and see what you think. Remember that my life is a breath. So again, he talks about how short, how brief, how insubstantial. I mean, it's a breath. Where'd it go? I mean, that's my eye will never again see good. So you talk about miserable. He doesn't just say, things are real bad right now. He's already said, my days are swifter than the weaver's shuttle, and shall come to their end without hope. You think it's all coming to an end. There's no hope for the future, and now he says, my eye will never again see good. Now, spoiler alert, in case you haven't read this 4,000-year-old book, you've only had your whole life to do it. Spoiler alert. He does get some hope later. Well, later on, in fact, he says, my eye shall see my Redeemer stand upon the earth. So later he's more positive, more optimistic. But right now he is in the depths of despair.
And honestly,
the depths of
the pit of despair. But at the end, he's honestly blessed more than he was at the beginning because of everything that he went through.
But you've got to know he still carries that pain.
Oh, of course.
You think about a family, a couple that loses a child. Yeah. They may have 3, 4, 5 children later but that one they lost is still
Yep.
crushing.
And we don't even know how many he lost
Yeah.
here.
Well, I tend to think he probably lost the same number that he gained. I think, but
That's fair.
I mean,
That's
I
fair.
think so. I think 10. That's my guess is 10.
But
I don't remember.
there's something I was gonna say about
sorry.
this as well. And it's not on you. I just completely blanked for some reason. But I do think whether this section in verse 7 is addressed to God directly or not, it does bear some similarity to Nehemiah's prayers that we're looking at. We're
remember me.
calling God to remember specific
Remember
aspects
them,
of
remember
what's
me,
going on.
and though he was definitely talking to God in Nehemiah.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's one. Yeah, like I said, it definitely directs itself toward someone that it would matter to tell this to.
Yeah.
Remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. That's not true.
Right.
But he doesn't know that's not true at this point.
Right. He's just suffering.
He's suffering, and he thinks it's going to get worse. It's never going to get better. And we've probably all been there. Probably all been in that spot
absolutely.
where it's just so bad.
I've been in spots where I'm just like, okay, just 30 more minutes.
Will this ever end?
And it's like, I know after those 30 more minutes, I'm probably going to have to go another 30 minutes.
30. Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure he hasn't had any sleep, and he's he said,
and he's been sitting out here for days.
And you know how miserable you are when you're sick, and you're tired, and you're tired of being sick, and you're tired of being tired,
And grieving on top of that.
And just the amount of suffering that one person can take, it's amazing sometimes just how much a person
is capable of bearing at once. Yeah.
He did lose 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters.
It's at the beginning. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I thought so. I thought it was the same. 7 sons, 3 daughters, and that's what he got later. Anyway, but so he says, okay, so he's never going to see any good again. But then he says, the eye of him who sees me will behold me no more. So I'm gonna die. I'm gonna cease to exist. The people that have been seeing me aren't going to see me anymore. I'm going to be gone. I will be dead. But then here's where I know that we're talking. I strongly believe,
Right.
pretty sure, 95% sure that he's talking to God, because he says, "The eye of him who sees me will behold me no more, while your eyes are on me, I shall be gone." Now it's possible he's talking to those 3 friends.
Yeah.
But they're
Because
going to sit there and watch him die, basically.
I'm also thinking with that, like, if God's eyes are on someone, you think about where can you go?
Yeah.
Nothing's going to
The
be able to...
psalmist says nowhere.
Yeah, nothing's going to be able to break God's ability to keep an eye on you.
Yeah, even if you're gone from the earth and people don't see you anymore, God's still going to be able to see you.
God's still going to know exactly where you're at and what's going on. And so that's why that section, which again, Job is kind of a book of poetry.
Right.
Maybe Job is just being poetic and he is still talking to God. Maybe he is just saying, hey, God, you're going to be watching me and I'm going to die. Maybe that is what's going on here. But I feel like if we are taking this literally, if he is saying, God, while your eyes are on me, I'm going to disappear, that doesn't
Well, be gone
seem
doesn't
accurate.
necessarily... It could be saying be gone
as
far in his
dying.
life. His life be gone.
That is a possibility. It's just the way I was thinking of it. I was like, that doesn't fit with what we know of God. But I want to point out another point of poetry here, that he's talking about what his eyes are never going to see again, and then he goes into talking about other people's eyes
Yeah.
and how he's going to be the one that disappears, just like his happiness has disappeared. And so I like pointing out the wordplay that is done in Hebrew poetry.
There's a lot of it, and some of it doesn't all come through in the English translation
Absolutely.
either. There's certain ways that they had of doing poetic things that...
Where they'll repeat something and then they'll repeat it a different way.
Yeah.
And in their language, it sounds amazing and it's really cool. But for us,
Right.
we're just like, why'd you say that 3
Or some of
times?
there's like an acrostic poem where each line starts with a certain letter or something
Right.
like that. And yet when you translate that into English, it doesn't anymore.
It doesn't work that way.
Because
Yep.
it's not the same English letter just because it was the same Hebrew letter.
Yep.
So yeah, there are a lot of things like that that we lose out on because of translation, that we can't really recapture that. It's kind of like, if you translate a rhyming poem in English into another language, you're going to lose your rhymes.
Unless you're very good.
Yeah.
Unless you're very good.
Well, and even if that language even has words that rhyme
That
with
rhyme
that,
for those, yeah.
And to get it to
I was reading
still mean the same thing and still rhyme in another language, it's
I was reading through Dante a little bit ago, and the person who translated that from the original Italian had to be very good at what they were doing, because the rhythm was still mostly there from what I could tell. The rhyming scheme was still kept, and they had to explain things at various different points because it's a very old poem, but the meaning still seemed to be fairly intact. So they did a very good job.
Yeah.
And that is not always the case.
Right.
A lot is lost in poetry, or even just in translation, even if it's not a poem.
Sure.
And that's why in the original Hebrew, this might be very clear about who he is addressing.
It could be much clearer.
But in order to translate that over into English, you would have to put in notes of Job here is now addressing God instead of his friends. Job is now addressing his friends. Job is just having this open to addressing everyone. And then that's going to break up what is actually being said, and it's going to make the reading a little bit more awkward, even if it does clarify some things.
Right. Yeah, it would kind of spoil the poeticness of it.
Yes.
To have those things stuck in there. Oh, this is this. Yeah.
We got a lot more to go.
Yeah, we do. We're only about, we're not even halfway through their thing. It goes on. He does, as the cloud fades and vanishes, so he who goes down to Sheol does not come up. So again, he's talking about what he's expecting his future to hold.
Have we talked about Sheol?
Maybe.
Okay.
We've done 100 and how many of these videos?
We can do a brief. Sheol is kind of Hebrew death,
The
afterlife, the grave.
Yeah. For some, it was just where your body goes.
Yeah.
For others, it was more where your spirit goes, or where the soul, where you exist almost.
And Sheol and Gehenna are separate concepts.
Yes,
right?
definitely.
Okay.
Gehenna is definitely the punishment, the place of punishment. Sheol is just, everybody goes to Sheol when they die.
Right.
It's just, and that's in the New Testament you've got Hades.
Right.
Which sometimes in current translations is translated hell, and that's somewhat inaccurate.
Right.
People a lot of times, they think of it as punishment, but no, in the Greek
in
philosophy
Greek
and in the language, Hades was just where everybody goes when they die.
Hades was just the land of the dead, the place of judgment.
Yeah. It's where everybody
and then you
goes.
would be sorted afterwards.
Yeah. And so when Hades gets translated as hell from Greek to English, that's really not a proper translation, because hell is the place of punishment. And so you see sometimes it talks about Jesus going to Hades.
Right.
And yet Jesus, and some translations translate it that he went into hell. But Jesus didn't go to hell. I'm sorry if you believe that. That's not true. He did not go to hell. He suffered death on the cross and separation from God on the cross because of carrying the sins of the world, but he didn't go to hell after he died. He did go to Hades, and then he returned, and it said he was leading the captives free when he did return from that Hadean realm. But yeah, Sheol is much the same. It's everybody goes there, and there were, of course, like in Jesus' time, there were the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees would have defined Sheol as just the grave. That's where they bury you, and
you're dead.
You're dead. You're in the grave. The Pharisees would have said, yes, they bury your body, but you're in Sheol, and you still have an existence.
Right.
But you're in a place of the dead, separate from the place of the living. And Jesus bears that out in his story about Lazarus and the rich man, um, and some things that carries with it the idea that, yes, there's a place where the dead go, but then there's also within that place of death, there's
There's
good
separate
and bad
places
places.
for judgment.
So,
Yep.
but yeah, but he does say, he goes down to Sheol, he doesn't come back. Um, and for the most part, that's true. There have been very few people who have come back.
Yep.
And most of them, it was obviously a miraculous thing.
Yep.
Someone raised them from the dead, and it was a miraculous event, and not just something that happens. It's generally a one-way street.
Yep.
He returns no more to his house, nor does his place know him anymore. So, yeah, everybody just forgets you. You're dead and you're gone, and everybody forgets about you.
Mm-hmm. And you're not coming back.
And so here, is he's still mourning, he's still lamenting the brevity of life, the direction that life goes, all of these things.
And here for verse 11, I feel like if we did swap to directly talking to God, I feel like verse 11 is kind of just swapping back to just addressing anyone.
Yeah, it's almost like an aside in the middle of another speech.
Therefore, I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. But then, like you were talking before this, in verse 12, it's almost like we swap back again. Am I the sea or a sea monster that you set a guard over me? Now, personally, I see this as him addressing his friends, because his friends have been sitting there kind of guarding over him for days.
Yeah.
But I do see that could also be addressed to God, almost as in, why have you done this to me? Am I a monster that you've done this to me? When I say, my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions.
And again, this part definitely looks like he's back to talking to God, because who can scare you with dreams and visions?
Yeah, because
it's not something his friends could
are
do.
not going to be able to do something like
they did try to scare him with words, but they couldn't get into his dreams and visions.
Right.
So this definitely looks like it's back to him addressing God. And it's possible he has been this whole time, even addressing God with all of this, and just crying out to God in his bitterness. I'm not going to restrain my mouth. I'm going to speak my anguish.
And we might want to look at how Job's friends respond to some of this, because I know sometimes they can give clues of why are you talking about God this way? How dare you address him this way? Clearly, you're the one who sinned. Stuff like that.
Right.
So there might be some more context clues after this chapter that we might want to look into. But verse 15 says, so that I would choose strangling and death rather than my bones. I think that's something there's definitely something there that's a little bit lost in translation. We can kind of piece it together, but it requires a little bit of a jump, that he's saying he would die rather than stay in his bones, stay alive in the body that he has.
Well, I think part of that may just be an exaggeration. He's so miserable, he'd rather die than keep suffering like he is, possibly, is what he's going for.
But the way that it's phrased, there's definitely something that's either a figure of speech in the original, or just a wording in the original that I feel like doesn't translate over very well.
Well, and it could be that it was a common saying of their day.
Exactly. There's some kind of idiom that we're missing out on.
Another translation says, I would prefer strangling and death more than life.
Right. I wonder why this one translated it this way. I guess they're trying to be a little more literal. Yeah. And that's...
Yeah, this is a translation that does tend toward the literal, more literal.
Right.
Now this one actually takes it from the Septuagint translation, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew,
Interesting.
and it translates it, "You will dismiss from my spirit my soul." You will dismiss my soul from my spirit, and my bones from death. So
that sounds almost positive.
almost, it's like you will dismiss my soul.
The first part is
from my
definitely
spirit, and my bones from death. I don't know. The Septuagint's an interesting translation, and then when you're translating it into English after translating it from Hebrew into Greek,
sometimes you're not sure if it clears things up
or confuses
adds
things
more confusion.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure, though. And that's the thing with poetry too, is there are a lot of things in poetry. Even a poem that was written in English.
Yeah.
There are a lot of times that I'm like, I don't have any idea.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know what you mean. So,
and it's one of those things where it's like the people that are going to get it are going to get it, and the people that aren't, it wasn't for you.
It was, well, and it's poetic, and like I said, they're also, we talked perhaps about idioms in the past, where you have just a saying that doesn't really mean what it literally means.
Right.
And if you try to translate it literally, it makes no sense to another person.
Right. Like beating around the bush.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
yeah.
It makes sense to us if we've heard it, if we understand what it means. It means you're not going directly to a subject.
You're not going to the point. You're going around it.
Right.
In a roundabout way to get there.
Right.
But there's a lot of things like that, and this could very well be one of them.
And I know there's a lot of those that are marked in Psalms and even in a little bit in Proverbs, where it's like, we don't know what the Hebrew means here.
Yeah.
Because it's a poetic thing. They're using poetic words. We can translate it literally, or we can translate it, the way we think it means.
Sure.
But there's still going to be something missing because
or like in Proverbs especially, the Proverbs were just that. They were proverbs.
Yeah.
We say a lot of things that were based on things that people used to do 100 years ago that are proverbs for us, or 200 years ago.
Right.
And they're proverbs for us, and we don't do those things anymore that way.
Right.
So, you'll have something like, a saying like, "A stitch in time saves 9." And most people don't do a lot of sewing anymore, so they don't understand necessarily what that means, although generally we still do. But there are other things that are even more
the younger
obscure.
Generation, like my generation, if you said that phrase to them, they would have no clue what you're talking about. They probably would have never heard it before, unless they've spent a lot of time with like grandparents, because that's that's a grandparents' generation by this point. But so definitely some stuff like that in Hebrew poetry, which again, Job is a book of Hebrew poetry. It did actually happen, but there's a lot of poetic nature to it. Yeah. And because of that, there can be a lot of idioms and a lot of stuff that we're not going to be able to understand necessarily.
And he does clarify to some degree how he feels here in
verse 16. Yep.
I loathe my life. He just hates living.
Right.
I would not live forever. So everybody talks, I want to live forever.
Right.
Yeah, probably not.
No.
At some point it would get miserable.
Yep.
And he doesn't want to live forever, at least not on this earth anyway. Leave me alone, for my days are a breath. So he's almost to the point where, just let me die.
Yeah.
I've had enough. I don't even want to live anymore. I hate living at this point. I want to die.
And he does call back there to the beginning of his days being a breath, his days disappearing, just like that. And right after he was talking about that the first time, he went right into my I will never see good. So I think that's kind of a mental callback to my days are a breath, and nothing I have here is even worth being here for.
Yeah. Miserable.
Yep.
And I think it's possible that he still is addressing God here in a prayer.
Yep.
And then I think this is where most agree.
Yep. I would definitely agree in verse 17.
For sure is talking to God, but I think I think he's been talking to God at least off and on throughout this whole section.
Yeah.
But now he definitely does go straight into just asking God, why do you even care so much?
I think we'll just read this last section all
Sure.
together. What is man that you make so much of him, and that you set your heart on him? Visit him every morning and test him every moment. How long will you not look away from me, nor leave me alone till I swallow my spit? If I sin, what do I do to you, you watcher of mankind? Why have you made me your mark? Why have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I shall lie in the earth. You will seek me, but I shall not be. And there's kind of an idiom there. Why will you not leave me alone till I swallow my spit? And that's, I think we can kind of extrapolate. God's not even leaving him alone long enough for him to swallow, but that's definitely a phrase that would have been kind of unique to them. That's something that we don't say nowadays.
Right.
But I also think as we're going through here, obviously this is addressed to God. This is a very different prayer than we have heard almost all through the Old Testament, because this is a prayer solely of complaint. There have been prayers where somebody asks God a question or complains slightly, but then there's usually some praise thrown in there. This is solely, Job is just, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? What have I done to you? Take this away from me. Let me die. Those sorts of things. And there is no positivity in here.
Yeah.
The only questions that are asked are, I think, less of curiosity and more just purely challenging.
Why are you picking on me?
Yes, literally. Why are you picking on me? Why
What
are
did
you
I
doing
do?
this to me?
What did I do to deserve this? Why are you
Right.
picking on me?
Why have you made me your mark? Why have I become a burden to you? Very, very different kind of prayer.
Why are you targeting me?
And I think seeing prayers like this from Job are so beneficial to us nowadays, because we know later on that God says that throughout everything Job went through, he didn't sin against God. And so it's so good for us that we can see when we're going through difficult things, we can cry out to God.
Yeah.
We can even, to some degree, almost lash out at God, because God understands what we're going through, and he's going to be able to take it a lot better than we can. And he understands
We just
that,
have to be careful not to charge him rashly,
Correct.
as Job's friends were doing.
Correct.
They weren't the ones suffering, but they were making
correct.
false accusations against God.
Correct.
So we do have to draw the line, but
And against
but to
Job.
just ask him, why are you doing this to me? Why are you letting me go through this?
Yep.
What is the point? Why are you picking on me? But it is interesting too. He starts there. What is man that you make so much of him? Or, this same idea is in Psalm 34. What is man that you're mindful of him?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like
and I wonder
psalmist
if David
quotes,
was referencing.
Yeah, if he was remembering this
Yep.
From his younger days, and what is this about?
Yep.
Why are you
This
why do you care so much about people? Why are you so involved in their lives? There are a lot of there's deism, and of course there's atheism that doesn't even believe in God, but there are a lot of religions that believe there is some sort of a higher power, but they don't believe he's active in the world and involved. Right. But Job is kind of questioning, why are you so involved?
Right.
Why don't you just sit back and stay out of our business and leave us alone?
Right.
Why are you so concerned about what goes on with people that you're getting involved in these things?
Right. Watching us every moment.
Yeah.
And even goes so far to refer to God as you watcher of mankind.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a title for God that I think the last time that kind of thing is heard is what's her name? Hagar.
Oh,
Hagar,
yeah.
when
Yeah.
she
The
refers
God
to
who
God
sees
as the
me.
God who sees me. But then it's in a very positive connotation.
Yeah,
This
there
is
she was
clearly
glad
negative.
he was watching.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting that most of the time throughout the Old Testament, when God is watching someone, God is watching out for them, and
It's a
it's shown in a
protective thing.
positive light. And Job, everything Job is saying here is, leave me alone. Stop watching me. Stop looking at me.
Yeah.
Don't bother me.
Quit testing me every moment.
Absolutely. Which, if you were going through something like Job went through, you'd be feeling absolutely the same way, if not worse.
Yeah, and then and he even says at the end there, and why won't you forgive me?
Yeah.
Why not? What is the problem?
Right.
Uh,
And I think that phrasing is interesting because we know in the New Testament that, the way that things used to be done with sacrifices could not take away iniquity. And I think it's interesting that he phrases this like, why don't you? Because we know that Job sacrificed.
regularly.
We know that he did everything that he could to make sure that he and his family were right with God.
Yeah.
So then there
And
is
we
that
know-
question,
And we know something that Job at this point doesn't know.
which is that he is
We know
blameless.
that God knows how
Right.
good he is.
Right.
That God, in fact,
think God-
bragged about him.
God knows how good Job is better than Job knows how good Job is.
Yeah.
You know?
Job thinks he's being unfairly picked on,
Right.
and in a way he's kind of right because
Yeah.
but he's being picked on because
He
He's
was
so
the
good.
best. Yeah.
um,
And can you think about that whenever Satan comes before God and he's like, I've been roaming all over the earth, and God's like, what about this person?
did you notice him?
Do you know how good that person is? I'm proud of that one. And think about how, like, buckle up for a challenge on that.
Yeah,
But also how satisfying it would be to be able to get to heaven and for God to look at you and just be like, you were one of the ones that I was proud of. I pointed Satan out to you. I pointed you out to Satan because I knew he could do everything and it wouldn't matter.
yeah.
You
could overcome it.
you were a Job during
Yeah.
your time on earth. And I feel like
I don't think I want to be a Job.
I don't know.
I know. I mean, yeah.
If you don't want to be a Job for God,
it's
then
hard to, I know.
it's challenging.
But do you want to go through what he went
Yeah.
through?
And even if
It's
you
tough.
don't go through the same thing, you can go through tribulations for God. I feel like the challenges that we go through for God nowadays are of a much more insidious kind than what they went through back then.
Yeah, certainly not as blatant and obvious.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of Satan's stuff now. It seems in our country, in our time right now,
Right.
his actions are definitely more underhanded, sly, sneaky, trick you.
Yep.
Instead of just let me destroy everything about you and try to knock you flat to the ground.
Yep.
It's more of let me slowly turn
Use
your
this
feet
over
off
here.
the path
Yep.
instead of let me tackle you and knock you down the hill.
Yep.
And not to say that he doesn't do that at all.
Right.
But
But-
now it
and-
seems like in our country, and it seems like he's being really effective with that technique.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He gets a lot of people to just kind of slowly, just drift off.
It's easy to
drift off away
take.
from God.
It's easy to take a couple punches. It hurts, but you can take it. But having someone slowly, gently nudge your thoughts in a different direction over years, it's hard to defend against.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like that, like the old story that they tell about the frog in the water.
Yep.
If you drop the frog in the boiling water, it'd jump out immediately.
Yep.
If you put the frog in room temperature water where it's comfortable and then slowly increase the temperature, it'll sit there and boil to death.
Yep.
And that happens to us
Yep.
spiritually. That's one of the things Satan does to us, is just slowly turn the temperature a little bit.
And he's gotten real good at that one.
Yeah, he's had lots of practice. So,
I don't know how much of that used to happen.
I mean, I think there was still. I mean,
Like,
you see,
I know you see it with, the Sadducees and Pharisees drifting so far off from what they should have been.
yeah, but you
But-
see it even in shorter term things. You see it with Peter.
Mhm.
Lord, I'd never deny you. I'll die for you.
Right.
And a few hours later, he's sitting by the fire going, I don't even know who the guy is.
Right. But even that's...
It wasn't where they were going, we're going to kill you if you say you were with him.
Right.
They were just like, hey, weren't you with him?
There is still a matter of fear there. Versus
probably.
today it's just, ooh, that's bad. Oh, but this isn't so bad, so I'll do that. Oh, well, that's less bad. It's the Overton window, almost.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Um,
Slide it just a little bit, just a little bit, just a little
but
bit.
anyway,
Yeah, until you're completely in a different position.
good prayer from Job, not for him, of course, but it's a good perspective for us to recognize our ability to be so open with God in prayer that it hurts.
Yeah, let him know your complaints.
Absolutely. How else are you going to be able to affect anything? Because he's the one that's in control. And so if you're not coming to him telling him, God, I don't like how this is going, then it's going to just keep going the same way. I think about a while back, I was in a situation at work and I was being very stubborn and I was refusing to pray about it because I was like, well, it'll be okay. God knows. And of course, nothing was changing. And then the first time I prayed about it, and I was like, God, can something happen with this? Something happened that exact day, first time I prayed about it. And I'm not saying that that's always going to happen. I'm not saying that God is just there at our beck and call, and as soon as you pray, whatever you want is going to appear. But I think sometimes God has things in motion, and he's just waiting for us to rely on him and complain a little bit.
And I forget who it was that said it now. I knew it one time. But he compared prayer to a rope that reaches up to a bell in heaven.
Yeah.
And he said the one who's going to get God's attention is not the one that comes and timidly tugs on the rope, but the one who grasps the rope with both hands and pulls with all his might.
Yep.
And if we miss our chance to get what we should get and could get from God because we don't talk to him about it. Jesus said, ask and you shall receive.
Right.
But if you never ask, you're never going to get. And so we're afraid, well, I don't want to bother God with it. It's
right.
It's not a big deal to him. But that's Joseph. Why do you care so much about us?
Right.
But he does care so much about us.
Right.
It is a big deal to him. He is our Heavenly Father, and he loves us, and he cares about us.
And there will be tests. There will be grief. There will be times where God knocks us down just to see if we're going to ask for his hand to get back up. And hopefully none of us are going to go through anything as bad as Job went through. But we need to remember that no matter what is going on, God does care for us. He is still our Father. And like in Lamentations chapter 3, he may destroy us, but he is still our only hope.
Yeah.
So.
We'll look at another one from Job next time.
Yeah.
And
we're moving through this book fairly quickly, from 1 to chapter 7.
Well, of course, you're going to have a lot of Job's friends just telling him what an awful person he is for chapters on end. So, but this one definitely some fascinating things scattered throughout this whole chapter.
Oh yeah. And this one went on a little bit longer because we had to establish the context and talk about...
it is a whole chapter's worth of stuff to look at here, too.
Which parts are prayer, which parts aren't, what we think about that. Little aside on Hebrew poetry, modern poetry, Italian poetry. We went some places.
We usually do.
But we hope you'll come back for the next video. We're going to be staying in Job for a little bit, and we'll see you then.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.